Welcome back, AP. Oh man, I know all of y'all are chomping at the bit to run down to Florida absolutely immediately, which I completely and legitimately understand. But we just got to finish up this last little bit of stuff about nationalism, right? We're going to finish up your projects tomorrow. We're going to start doing a couple other things, right? Now, while you guys are gone, there will be one flip waiting for you when you come back. Deal? All right. So there'll be a flip waiting for you when you come back. Okay. It just needs to be done by the time you return to school that Monday. Okay. So, or I don't know if that's like still like a skip day or whatever. Just let me know and we'll figure it out. But let's get after it. Okay. So really, really quickly, when we talked our last when Jules Baer showed you the last section, the big things to kind of remember coming out of that, right, are our four big powers: Germany, France, England, Austria, Hungary, right? Two of them will eventually be central powers. Two of them will eventually be allies. So we had the modernization of Russia, which is a very cool concept, right? We talked about that under Alexander II, Alexander III, Sergei Witte, like a lot of different people. Now, the Crimean War, now the 1905 revolution, Nicholas II. Sorry, I go on and on about Russia. But the Austro-Hungarians, of course, are losing power because of all the ethnic minorities inside of their country trying to self-nationalize and self-actualize and become like countries of their own, right? Now, one thing to add to this section really, really quick, 1867, I believe it is, 1867, is when dual rule becomes a thing, and they become the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? So dual rule, Austria, Hungary. Let's double check on that really quick. I don't want to be giving you the wrong year, but I'm pretty confident it's 1867. Yep, 1867. So 1867, they become the Austro-Hungarian Empire, recognizing that Hungary is like not an autonomous state, but also has a leadership and a government of its own and its own legislative body. And then Austria has its legislative body and its governing idea, but the one monarch rules over both, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, and his name at the time was Franz Joseph. Now, revolts and revolutions are going to be crushed by a coalition of Austrian and Russian armies, though. Now, we left off, too, talking about Jewish emancipation and anti-Semitism. Now, in your notes, this might not have been formatted exactly right, because that was my fault. That had nothing to do with Jules. It was my fault completely. So, big things getting into it, though. The Jews were on the right track. All right, so early on in about like 1871, many historians at the time predicted that soon into the future, by 1900, the ideas of Jewish anti-Semitism were all but going to evaporate, right? Because early on in 1871, Jewish restrictions were lifted. They were emancipated, right? They were not segregated from certain places. They were allowed to exist educationally in the same spheres as other non-Jewish people. They were allowed to now grow and prosper and own different shops and actually like expand their ability to work and things like that. There was going to be a massive amount of prosperity. The only places that were still restricted from was like the government and certain other areas as well. But they're going to prosper and they're going to enter into law practices, becoming doctors, like becoming specialists in a lot of things outside of the traditional Jewish jobs that Christians since the Middle Ages had allowed them to do, like peddlers, moneylenders, or like artisans, jewelers, things like that. However, then the stock market is going to crash in 1873, and it's going to change everything, right? And Jews are going to be blamed for this crashing of the stock market, and anti-Semitism is going to come roaring back, right? They were blamed for financial control and racial corruption on a biologic level, which is just going to be utterly disgusting and absolutely screwed up that anybody would ever even think these things, but we do know as historians these things happened, right? So extreme nationalists are also going to begin to lash out against even common Jews like shopkeepers and store owners, which was a very, very, very insane thing that actually occurred because nationalism is meant to unify a people. And ironically enough, after 1871, a lot of these Jews actually saw the country of which they lived in as a homeland, right? So, but then extreme nationalism tied to conservatism inside of Europe is going to be terrible after the stock market crashes, and they're going to start persecuting Jews on many different levels, right? So, which is so close. It's so close. Now, like, even common Jews like shopkeepers and store owners are going to see massive amounts of persecution, boycotts against their businesses, etc., like different things like that, which this is going to become an ever-present problem post-1873 going all the way up until 1945, right? So that is where political Zionism is a thing that begins to originate, right? Which is a movement towards a Jewish political state, right? It's in response to this extreme anti-Semitism following the stock market crash of 1873, following events like the Dreyfus Affair, right? Like, so this actually brought around early on by a man named Herzl. Now, I always remember Karl Lueger, but why do I never remember Herzl's first name? I want to say it starts with like an E. Let me double check it really quick. Herzl, Zionism, Theodore. Yeah. So Theodore Herzl and Karl Lueger are going to become like the representative figures of Zionism and Christian conservatism nationalism, right? So you've got Zionism, which is appealing a lot to the liberals, and the liberals are like, hey, I mean, like, if you're going to add to the economy, we really don't care. Go knock yourself out. And then Lueger, on the other hand, not the same Lueger of the pistol, different Lueger, all right, who is the mayor of Vienna for a long period of time, becomes like the nationalism, Christian conservatism, like hero, right? So not a hero. I wouldn't call him a hero at all. He's a total a-hole. Now, anyway, but Theodore Herzl, German nationalist, but turns to Zionism against nationalism in the government and begins to proclaim that there should be a country for Jewish people because of the massive amounts of anti-Semitic activity that's going on all over Europe, right? Which at the time makes complete sense, right? Makes complete sense when you think about it at the time, right? Because they have no homeland. They are being persecuted in every single country. It's been happening for 600 years, right? And it's like, right? So it makes complete sense. And then you've got Karl Lueger, who is a total jerk. All right, so mayor of Vienna, he begins to give fiery speeches explaining how the Jewish minority is the reason for every single economic downfall. And a lot of people believe that they were doing this specifically to try and turn away and use these finger-pointing schemes as a way to try and suppress like socialists, to suppress Jews, to also like kind of hide the conservative acts that were going on in the government, which included like the limitation of people's voting rights and things like that. Now, the mayor of Vienna, though, he limited the expansion of Jewish businesses by buying up basic services, right? So his theories are going to gigantically impact a very young artist who was massively unsuccessful when he tried to apply to school in Vienna, Adolf Hitler, right? So like Lueger becomes the inspiration for him. So in Eastern Europe, anti-Semitism was at its worst, okay? 4 million of the 8 million European Jews lived in Russia, right? And Russia is then going to begin a campaign of what's known as Russian expulsion, where they are literally going to have the military and the police stand back and watch common Russians, instigated by the government, again, trying to hide the ever-pressing, like the 1905 revolution and the ever-pressing extreme authoritarianism of Russia on its growth, trying to hide that by being like, hey, well, like, look, we're going to let you attack the Jews so you don't look and see what the government is doing to you, all right? So anti-Semitism at its worst, they allow them to loot, pillage, and destroy Jewish businesses and homes, leading to 2.75 million people immigrating out of Russia into Western Europe and leading to a large number of deaths, right? So, and many of these Jews actually also immigrated to the United States. But like this Russian expulsion is just an example of anti-Semitism at its worst, and then you had the growth of Zionism as well, right? So, then we got to move on to the growth of socialism and how socialism is going to evolve and how Marxism is going to be a very different thing, right? So now, so everybody remember when we looked at our little like spectrum and we had like, oh, socialism's over here, and then we looked at the socialist ideas, and then we looked at like we looked at revolutionary socialism, utopian socialism. Then we looked at Marxism, socialism. Seas are going to fill with lemonade. Louis Blanc said like, oh, the bourgeois must help them out. Oh, Saint-Simon, like all these people like having their different ideas. Well, socialism is going to continue to grow. Now, ironically enough, not in the way that you would think, all right? I know, like, Lucas is like, oh my God, here we go. Well, no, it's like, it's a lot less what you would think. It became less about ideals and much more about practicality, all right? So Germany ironically enough, saw the biggest growth of socialism, right? So many other countries are going to see growth of socialism as well. The British are going to see a growth in it. The French are going to see a growth in it. The Germans had the biggest, and the Russians are going to even see a growth in it, but not as much as Germany. The Socialist Democratic Party held the majority in the Reichstag, right? So now growth was seen everywhere else. However, this is right here. This is post expulsion of Bismarck, right? Because what did Bismarck do? He said, hey, you're not allowed to be in our Reichstag anymore, right? Write this down somewhere, following the expulsion of Bismarck by Wilhelm II, socialism saw a rapid growth in Germany and actually gained the majority in the Reichstag, right? So a lot of this had to do with, of course, the rapid industrialization of Germany, because they industrialized so quickly that the number of working class Germans grew rapidly. And if you look at the territories that Germany actually brought in to create the German Empire, very rural, very spread out, right? And as you industrialize, you're going to lead to rapid urbanization, the fall of any remnants of feudal era societies, and introduction of this gigantic working class. So of course socialism is going to grow rapidly, right? So now to also put this into perspective, this quote right here, there's going to be a growth of international socialist parties as well. So Marx said a working man has no country. So ironically enough, socialism and nationalism, let's rephrase, Marxism and nationalism do not get along. They don't make any sense because Marx actually believed that flags and countries are just images of people trying to suppress you, right? So what's going to end up happening though, radical socialism is going to be stifled. So I know this is super confusing. Bear with me, all right? Danielle, Grace, Kieran, all you guys, Tommy, listen closely, okay? So socialism was growing. The ideas of socialism were growing. Even in the face of things like Bismarck trying to give Social Security pay, old age insurance, health insurance, things like that, right? Socialism is growing. Radical socialism, on the other hand, their growth is going to be stifled. Now, when we say radical socialism, we mean Marxism. But Marxism is going... Okay, look. We have Marxism and socialism. Two different things, okay? Marxism is a form of socialism, but socialism is not a form of Marxism. It's like the square and rectangle thing, right? So, Marxism is going to be stifled, so you can replace radical and just put Marxism. It's going to be stifled by certain little things that were occurring in history that they didn't know how to deal with. Wages are on the rise. People in 1900 could buy twice as many things as they could in 1850 because wages were growing so rapidly, right? Military service and education is going to indoctrinate people with the ideas of nationalism, protecting your country, the common good, the country as a whole, not the country as per class, right? Voting rights are growing on the rapid as well. Universal suffrage is coming in. So why would a Marxist be upset? Or a Marxist is going to remain upset because social classes exist, but a common walking around socialist, when he sees universal suffrage, he sees a giant victory. And also labor unions are going to begin to rise, which spells a lot of upfront to Marxism. Unions were prohibited in many countries in the early right there, 1800s. The early 1800s, in 1799, British companies actually saw unions as a form of espionage, right? Or treason. And in 1793, the Reign of Terror outlawed unions and guilds in the pursuit of liberty, right? So, as time progressed, though, unions are going to begin to grow as these laws begin to come down, and they're going to mobilize. And instead of just representing, so you remember we looked at the Industrial Revolution, it was the Amalgamated Society of Paper Makers, the Amalgamated Society of Woodworkers, right? Those are skilled laborers. So early unions appealed to skilled laborers because when guilds died, they were just replaced by these groups of skilled labor unions, right? Well, as they begin to come down and striking was still illegal, unions were still in their infancy. But as time began to grow, main goals of early unions, especially in union-stifled Germany, began to represent very basic issues for basic workers, right? So as unions began to grow and basic workers began to be more represented, these things called bread and butter issues became to be very, very highly prevalent, right? Which, of course, those bread and butter issues include hours, wages, and working conditions. Those are the things that they wanted, right? And by the 1880s and 1890s, strikes became non-illegal anymore. So strikes became legal and were common and successful. And unions had grown to include even unskilled laborers, right? So one of the best examples of this unskilled labor union coalition striking ideas, right? Check this out. This is May Day, all right? There are two of them, actually. So the Second International, which is like a gigantic socialist, international socialist union, actually declared and had a national striking holiday recognized for all workers, not just skilled workers, right? So the unions then grabbed onto this idea, and now every single day or every single year in Europe, May 1st is their form of Labor Day. It's known as international working, like the International Workforce Day, right? So it was brought around by the idea of allowing unskilled laborers to participate in union activities, right? And so the growth of unskilled laborers entering into unions for hours, wages, and working conditions are going to all go on strike on the exact same day, on May 1st, right? And it still happens every single year. May 1st, International Working Day, right? So I think we should celebrate it. Personally, you guys can come in and then we'll just have a parade down the hallway and be like, we refuse to work. It's International Working Day. All right. So now, anyway, so then there's a couple other, this is one of my favorite things. This is the Matchstick Girl strike. So this is another kind of growth of unions striking and other things going on. Now, some of you are looking over here at the left and you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with that guy's face? All right. So, let's get into that. So a group of matchstick girls in London actually worked in a factory that created matches, right? And these matches were created using white phosphorus. So white phosphorus used to actually make the tip of a match, right? And all matches used to be white tipped, okay? So now, on the other hand, matches are red tipped because of red phosphorus. Because these matchstick girls and workers in these matchstick factories began to notice this right here, a condition called phossy jaw. Phossy jaw would be when the white phosphorus fumes would begin to actually leach into a person's gums, leading to great jaw pain and giant pustules forming inside of their mouth, right? And growing and growing and growing at rapid rates, causing facial deformities and extreme pain. And sometimes the removal of teeth, sometimes the wiring shut of jaws, a lot of different medical issues. So these girls are going to go on strike, and along with the Salvation Army, they're going to open up new matchstick factories that use red phosphorus that's much more safe, right? So it's amazing, the ideas of how Marxism was stifled by these different things. But this is the last slide, by the way, so you can pause it and listen because I'm going to go through this quick, all right? So now Marxism is going to be adopted now more on gradual ideas, all right? So it's just changing. Marxism becomes the minority and it begins to seem as very aggressive, right? And socialism begins to take on an idea known as revisionism, right? And revisionism is the idea of revising socialism and trying to revise Marxism to make it more palatable, right? To make it make more sense, right? So Edward Bernstein was one of the big, progressive, idea makers behind this. He wrote this thing called Evolutionary Socialism, showing that many Marxian predictions are not actually true. Because Karl Marx actually came up with ideas. He's like, well, the working class will begin to grow, and then the bourgeois will begin to shrink down, and we will be controlled basically by these giant blah, blah, blah. Well, ironically enough, this extremely terribly poor working class actually began to shrink, and the middle class was actually on the rise. And so that actually shows you that with hard work and different other things, many people were moving up in society, right? So Edward Bernstein wanted to create a more progressive socialist state using this thing called using legislation, unions, and then this other thing, listen closely, collective bargaining. which is literally when unions would meet with employers and actually try to reform different ideas of work. And ironically enough, in this period, collective bargaining actually grew at rapid rates. And like within, I think it was something crazy, it like increased like 500%. All right. So like, and like wages were on the rise because of collective bargaining. Working conditions were better because of collective bargaining. Health insurance grew because of collective bargaining. And Edward Bernstein was a big proponent of this. In his Evolutionary Socialism, he said, we have to create a state in which we integrate the ideas of capitalism and socialism to protect our people, but also protect our countries, right? Now, this was seen as absolute heresy by Marxists. They thought this was stupid and outlandish and totally against the cause, right? Which is going to lead to a large split, leading to people like Lenin being like, shut up, Bernstein, we're going to just have a revolution anyway. But that's where we're going to stop. I hope you have a great weekend. See you guys later. Have a good one. Bye.